The Middle Ages. A time of war. The Black Death. Legal and political changes. A distinct identity. The Wars of the Roses. The Middle Ages. War at home and abroad. Broadly speaking, the Middle Ages, or medieval period, spans 1,000 years. From the end of the Roman Empire, in AD 476 up until 1485. However, the focus here is on the period after the Norman conquest. It was a time of almost constant war. The English kings fought with the Welsh, Scottish, and Irish noblemen for control of their lands. In Wales, the English were able to establish their rule. In 1284, King Edward I of England introduced the Statute of Rhuddlan, which annexed Wales to the Crown of England. Huge castles, including Conwy and Carnarvon, were built to maintain this power. By the middle of the 15th century, the last Welsh rebellions had been defeated. English laws and the English language were introduced. In Scotland, the English kings were less successful. In 1314, the Scottish, led by Robert the Bruce, defeated the English at the Battle of Bannockburn, and Scotland remained unconquered by the English. At the beginning of the Middle Ages, Ireland was an independent country. The English first went to Ireland as troops to help the Irish king and remained to build their own settlements. By 1200, the English ruled an area of Ireland known as the Pale, around Dublin. Some of the important lords in other parts of Ireland accepted the authority of the English king. During the Middle Ages, the English kings also fought a number of wars abroad. Many knights took part in the Crusades, in which European Christians fought for control of the Holy Land. English kings also fought a long war with France, called the 100 Years' War, even though it actually lasted 116 years. One of the most famous battles of the 100 Years' War was the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where King Henry V's vastly outnumbered English army defeated the French. The English largely left France in the 1450s. The Black Death. The Normans used a system of land ownership known as feudalism. The king gave land to his lords in return for help in war. Landowners had to send certain numbers of men to serve in the army. Some peasants had their own land, but most were serfs. They had a small area of their lord's land where they could grow food. In return, they had to work for their lord and could not move away. The same system developed in southern Scotland. In the north of Scotland and Ireland, land was owned by members of the clans, prominent families. In 1348, a disease, probably a form of plague, came to Britain. This was known as the Black Death. 1/3 of the population of England died and a similar proportion in Scotland and Wales. This was one of the worst disasters ever to strike Britain. Following the Black Death, the smaller population meant there was less need to grow cereal crops. There were labor shortages, and peasants began to demand higher wages. New social classes appeared, including owners of large areas of land, later called the gentry, and people left the countryside to live in the towns. In the towns, growing wealth led to the development of a strong middle class. In Ireland, the Black Death killed many in the Pale and, for a time, the area controlled by the English became smaller. Legal and political changes. In the Middle Ages, Parliament began to develop into the institution it is today. Its origins can be traced to the King's Council of Advisers, which included important noblemen and the leaders of the church. There were few formal limits to the king's power until 1215. In that year, King John was forced by his noblemen to agree to a number of demands. The result was a Charter of Rights called the Magna Carta, which means the Great Charter. The Magna Carta established the idea that even the king was subject to the law. It protected the rights of the nobility and restricted the king's power to collect taxes or to make or change laws. In the future, the king would need to involve his noblemen in decisions. In England, parliaments were called for the king to consult his nobles, particularly when the king needed to raise money. The numbers attending parliament increased and two separate parts, known as houses, were established. The nobility, great landowners, and bishops sat in the House of Lords. Knights, who were usually smaller landowners, and wealthy people from towns and cities were elected to sit in the House of Commons. Only a small part of the population was able to join in electing the members of the Commons. A similar parliament developed in Scotland. It had 3 houses, called estates: the Lords, the Commons, and the clergy. This was also a time of development in the legal system. The principle that judges are independent of the government began to be established. In England, judges developed common law by a process of precedence, that is, following previous decisions, and tradition. In Scotland, the legal system developed slightly differently and laws were codified, that is, written down. A distinct identity. The Middle Ages saw the development of a national culture and identity. After the Norman conquest, the king and his noblemen had spoken Norman French, and the peasants had continued to speak Anglo-Saxon. Gradually these two languages combined to become one English language. Some words in modern English, for example, park and beauty, are based on Norman French words. Others, for example, apple, cow, and summer, are based on Anglo-Saxon words. In modern English, there are often two words with very similar meanings, one from French and one from Anglo-Saxon. Demand, French, and ask, Anglo-Saxon, are examples. By 1400, in England, official documents were being written in English, and English had become the preferred language of the royal court and parliament. In the years leading up to 1400, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a series of poems in English about a group of people going to Canterbury on a pilgrimage. The people decided to tell each other stories on the journey, and the poems described the travelers and some of the stories they told. This collection of poems is called the Canterbury Tales. It was one of the first books to be printed by William Caxton, the first person in England to print books using a printing press. Many of the stories are still popular. Some have been made into plays and television programs. In Scotland, many people continued to speak Gaelic, and the Scots language also developed. A number of poets began to write in the Scots language. One example is John Barber, who wrote the Bruce about the Battle of Bannockburn. The Middle Ages also saw a change in the type of buildings in Britain. Castles were built in many places in Britain and Ireland, partly for defence. Today many are in ruins, although some, such as Windsor and Edinburgh, are still in use. Great cathedrals, for example, Lincoln Cathedral, were also built, and many of these are still used for worship. Several of the cathedrals had windows of stained glass, telling stories about the Bible and Christian saints. The glass in York Minster is a famous example. During this period, England was an important trading nation. English wool became a very important export. People came to England from abroad to trade and also to work. Many had special skills, such as weavers from France, engineers from Germany, glass manufacturers from Italy, and canal builders from Holland. The Wars of the Roses. In 1455, a civil war was begun to decide who should be King of England. It was fought between the supporters of two families, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. This war was called the Wars of the Roses, because the symbol of Lancaster was a red rose and the symbol of York was a white rose. The war ended with the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. King Richard III of the House of York was killed in the battle, and Henry Tudor, the leader of the House of Lancaster, became King Henry VII. Henry then married King Richard's niece, Elizabeth of York, and united the two families. Henry was the first king of the House of Tudor. The symbol of the House of Tudor was a red rose with a white rose inside it as a sign that the houses of York and Lancaster were now allies. Check that you understand. The wars that took place in the Middle Ages. How Parliament began to develop. The way that land ownership worked. The effects of the Black Death. The development of English language and culture. The Wars of the Roses and the founding of the House of Tudor. We will now cover the summary and study guide for the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages. A time of war. Broadly speaking, the Middle Ages, or medieval period, spans 1,000 years from AD 476, the end of the Roman occupation of Britain, to 1485. However, the focus here is on the period after the Norman conquest in 1066. It was a time of almost constant war. Wales was annexed to the English crown. The Scots remained independent. Ireland gradually came under the influence of England. There were also wars abroad. Knights took part in the Crusades, in which European Christians fought to control the Holy Land. English kings fought the 100 Years' War with France. The English largely left France in the 1450s. The armies were provided by landowners who had been given land by the king. This was known as feudalism. Some peasants had their own land, but most were serfs. They had a small area of their lord's land where they could grow food. In return, they had to work for their lord and could not move away. The same system developed in southern Scotland. In the north of Scotland and Ireland, land was owned by members of the clans. The Black Death, in 1348, 1/3 of the population of England, and a similar proportion in Scotland and Wales, died from a form of plague, known as the Black Death. There was a shortage of people to work on the land, and the peasants began to demand higher wages. New social classes appeared, and people left the countryside to live in the towns. This all led to the development of a strong middle class. In Ireland, the Black Death killed many in the Pale, English-controlled areas. Find out about the wars between England and Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. Name a famous battle in the 100 Years' War. What was the feudal system and how was it introduced? How did the Black Death lead to the development of a strong middle class? Legal and political changes. The origins of the UK Parliament are in the Middle Ages. In 1215, King John was forced by his noblemen to agree to the Magna Carta. In the future, the king would have to consult the noblemen if he wanted to collect taxes or change laws. This developed into Parliament. As it grew, Parliament in England was divided into two parts. The House of Lords for the nobility, great landowners, and bishops. The House of Commons for knights, who were usually smaller landowners, and wealthy people from towns and cities. The electorate was very small. Parliament also developed in Scotland. It had three houses, called estates: the Lords, the Commons, and the clergy. Judges became independent of government, and common law developed in England. In Scotland, the legal system developed slightly differently. Find out. What does Magna Carta mean? What were its implications for the monarch's power? How did the legal system develop in Scotland? A distinct identity, a national culture and identity started to develop in the Middle Ages. In England, Norman French, spoken by the king and his court, and Anglo-Saxon, spoken by the peasants, merged into one English language. English had become the preferred language of the royal court and parliament by 1400. Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a series of poems in English about a group of people going to Canterbury on a pilgrimage. It was one of the earliest books to be printed by William Caxton, the first person in England to print books using a printing press. In Scotland, many people continued to speak Gaelic, and the Scots language also developed. You will find many buildings which date from the Middle Ages. There are many castles, some of which are in ruins, in Britain and Ireland. Some are still in use. Beautiful cathedrals are also found across the country. Many have stained glass windows which tell Bible stories. England became an important trading nation. Wool was exported, and people came to trade and work. Find out. Give some examples of English words which come from Norman French and Anglo-Saxon. What language was used for official documents by 1400? What were the Canterbury Tales about? Who was William Caxton? Give an example of a poem written in the Scots language. Give some examples of castles and cathedrals in Britain. What skills did people bring to England from other countries? The Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses were fought in 1455. Supporters of the House of York, whose symbol was a white rose, and the House of Lancaster, whose symbol was a red rose, battled to decide who would be King of England. The House of Lancaster beat the House of York at the Battle of Bosworth Field, and Henry Tudor became King Henry VII. Find out. When did the Battle of Bosworth Field take place and what was the outcome? How were the houses of York and Lancaster united? Explain how the Tudor Rose was formed. A measured look at key figures of the Middle Ages. Let's take a more composed look at some of the prominent figures who left their mark on medieval England and its surroundings. Their actions and legacies often reveal deeply human facets, for better or worse. First, reigning from 1199 to 1216, we have King John of England. He is famously known for being compelled by his barons to sign the Magna Carta, often burdened with the unflattering epithet Lackland or even the more derisive Bad King John. His reign was far from smooth, marked by the loss of French territories and escalating conflicts with his nobility. Yet, it's an ironic twist of history that the turmoil of his era ultimately paved the way for the principle that the king is subject to the law. Next, from 1272 to 1307, came Edward I, King of England, bearing the distinct sobriquet Longshanks due to his height. He was also known as the Conqueror of Wales. Having brought Wales under English dominion through the Statute of Rhuddlan in 1284, he frequently invaded Scotland, earning him the fearsome title Hammer of the Scots. While his aggressive policies expanded England's territorial reach, They were, understandably, far from welcomed by the people of Wales and Scotland. A symbol of Scottish independence, Robert the Bruce cemented Scotland's independence by decisively defeating the English at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. However, even this national hero was not without blemish, having killed a rival in a power struggle nevertheless. His strong will and strategic acumen ensured he remained an undeniable warrior for freedom in the eyes of the Scottish people. Henry V, King of England from 1413 to 1422. His name is immortalized by the dramatic victory at the Battle of Agincourt during the Hundred Years' War. Yet, this triumph came at a considerable cost to England in terms of war expenses and lives, arguably prolonging the protracted conflict while achieving short-term success. His actions cast a complex shadow on subsequent Anglo-French relations. The Scottish poet, John Barber, active around 1330, he authored the Bruce, a significant historical epic, contributing to the development of a distinct Scottish literature as a contemporary of Geoffrey Chaucer. His work in Scots, rather than English, played a crucial role in shaping Scotland's cultural identity. Often referred to as the father of English literature, the poet Geoffrey Chaucer, living from approximately 1343 to 1400, he vividly portrayed medieval English society in his seminal work, The Canterbury Tales. His skillful depiction of diverse characters and their interwoven narratives through storytelling significantly influenced subsequent literature. His works continue to offer us glimpses into the lives and thoughts of people in the Middle Ages. William Caxton, the man who brought printing to England in the latter half of the 15th century, he introduced printing technology, learned on the continent, to England, publishing numerous books, including the Canterbury Tales. This greatly contributed to the spread of knowledge and the advancement of literature. However, the advent of movable type printing also marked a cultural turning point, transforming the work of monastic scribes. The monarch caught in the throes of the Wars of the Roses, Richard III, King of England from 1471 to 1483, and the last Plantagenet king, he remains a figure whose reputation is sharply divided, often portrayed as a ruthless tyrant in Shakespeare's plays. Recent scholarship has sought to present a more nuanced view of his character. He was ultimately defeated by Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, becoming the last English king to die in battle. Finally, the founder of a new era, Henry VII, ruling England from 1485 to 1509, he brought an end to the Wars of the Roses and established the Tudor dynasty with a somewhat tenuous claim to the throne. He skillfully utilized diplomacy and strategic marriages to ensure domestic stability rather than being a heroic figure. He was a pragmatic and cautious monarch who solidly laid the foundations of the state through astute political maneuvering.